I brought a piece of bread to Moscow from the Lykovs. Showing your friends what it is? Only once I heard an uncertain answer, but close to the truth. It seems to be bread. Yes, this is Lykovs bread. They bake it from dried, pounded potatoes in a mortar with the addition of 2 or 3 handfuls of rye, chopped with pestle, and handfuls of crushed hemp seeds. This mixture, kneaded in water, without yeast and any sourdough, is baked in a frying pan and is a thick black pancake. This bread is not what it is, it's scary to look at it, said Agafia. However, they ate. They eat even now. They have never even pinched real bread. The family's breadwinner for all the years was a vegetable garden. A flat section of a mountain, grubbed up in the taiga. For insurance against the vicissitudes of the mountain summer, a section was also grubbed downhill, and also right next to the river. Above, there was a bad harvest. We are collecting something below. Potatoes, onions, turnips, peas, hemp, and rye were ripened in the garden. Seeds, like a jewel, along with iron and liturgical books, were brought from a settlement now swallowed up by the taiga 46 years ago. And never once did any culture misfire in these half a century. It did not degenerate, provided food and seed material, which, needless to say, they cherished more than their eyes. The potato. Demonic, prolific, prodigal plant, brought by Peter from Europe, and not accepted by the Old Believers along with tea and tobacco, ironically for many later became the main breadwinner. And the Lykovs also had potatoes as the basis of their food. She was well born here. They kept it in a cellar lined with logs and birch bark. But supplies from harvest to harvest, as life has shown, are insufficient. June snowfalls in the mountains could have a strong and even catastrophic effect on the garden. A strategic 2-year supply was absolutely necessary. However, for 2 years, even in a good cellar, the potatoes were not preserved. We have adapted to make a stock from dried. It was cut into plates and dried on hot days on large sheets of birch bark, or directly on the chopping blocks of the roof. Drying, if necessary, even by the fire, and on the stove. Birch bark boxes with dried potatoes now filled the entire free space of the hut. Boxes with potatoes were also placed in storage sheds. In log cabins on high pillars. Everything, of course, was carefully covered and swaddled in birch bark rags. All the years the Lykovs ate potatoes with peels, explaining this by saving food. But it seems to me that by some instinct they guessed right, potatoes with skin are healthier. Turnips, peas and rye served as a food aid, but were not the basis of food. There was so little grain that the younger Lykovs had no idea about bread as such. The dried grain was crushed in a mortar, and rye porridge was cooked from it on holy holidays. Once there was a carrot in the garden, but the seeds were once lost from a mouse misfortune. And people have lost, apparently, a very necessary food product. The painfully pale skin color of the Lykovs, perhaps, should be explained, not so much by sitting in the dark, as by the lack of a substance in food called carotene, which is abundant in carrots, oranges, tomatoes. This year, geologists supplied the Lykovs with carrot seeds, and Agafia brought us to the fire like a delicacy, 2 still pale orange roots, she said with a smile. Carrot. Avka, the taiga was the second vegetable garden here. Without her gifts, it is unlikely that a person's long life in deaf isolation would be possible. In April, the taiga already treated them to birch sap. He was collected in birch bark tubes. And, if there were enough dishes, the Lykovs would probably have guessed to evaporate the juice, achieving a concentration of sweetness. But you can't put a birch bark on the fire. They put the tuisa in a natural refrigerator. In a stream, where the juice did not spoil for a long time. Following the birch sap, they went to collect wild onions and nettles. A soup was boiled for nettles, and dried in bunches for the winter for body strength. Well, in summer, the taiga is already mushrooms. They were eaten baked and boiled, raspberries, blueberries, lingonberries, currants. Exhausted, sitting on potatoes, we ate these gifts of God abundantly. But in the summer it was necessary to remember about winter too. Summer is short. Winter is long and harsh. As stalked as a chipmunk, there must be a resident of the taiga. And again birch bark tuisa were used. Mushrooms and blueberries were dried, lingonberries were poured into a birch bark dish with water. But all this is in smaller quantities than one might have expected. There was no time. At the end of August, the suffering was ripening. When all affairs and worries were pushed aside, it was necessary to go to make a mistake. For the Lykovs, nuts were taiga potatoes. Cones from a cedar, the Lykovs say not cedar, but cedar, those that are lower, knocked together with a long spruce pole. But it was imperative to climb a tree to shake off the cones. All the Lykovs, young, old, men and women, are accustomed to easily climbing the cedars. The cones were poured into hollowed out tubs. They were later shelled on wooden graters. Then the nut was threaded, clean, selected. In a birch bark dish they kept him in a hut and in storage sheds, protecting him from dampness, from bears and rodents. Nowadays, medical chemists, having decomposed the contents of the cedar pine fruit, have found many components in it, from fats and proteins to some small exclusive substances that cannot be retained in memory. At the Moscow bazaar, this weighty one I saw among the southerners with pomegranates and apricots, a grasping Siberian with a trunk of cedar cones. To avoid unnecessary questions, a piece of cardboard with informative information was pinned to the bump with a match, from pressure. The ruble is a piece. The Lykovs do not know money, but the value of everything that contains a cedar pine nut is known to them in practice. And in all fruitful years, they stored up as many nuts as they could. Nuts keep well, do not go rancid for 4 years. The Lykovs consume them naturally. Not like chipmunks, sometimes pounded crushed into bread, and make their famous milk for nuts, which even cats are hungry for. Small portions of animal food were also supplied by the taiga. There were no livestock or any domestic animals. I didn't have time to find out why. Most likely, the dugout ark in which the Lykovs moved up the Abakan did not have enough room for living creatures. But, perhaps, consciously, the Lykovs decided not to start the house creature. It would be safer to hide and live more inconspicuously. I ask you to share these videos in your social networks, using the buttons under the video, and subscribe to the channel. I ask you to go and watch other videos about Agafia Lykova, which you now see on the screen in the end screensavers.